Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Weil, and I'm going to be the instructor for this class, Plant Science Technology 2370, Introduction to Turfgrass. And Before I get started, just wanted to talk a little bit about myself so you know who I am. I actually went to Ohio State for plant pathology, originally started in architecture and moved into landscape architecture. And while I was in the landscape architecture program, I actually started taking some plant pathology classes and really enjoyed it. So I ended up graduating from Ohio State, like I said, with a degree in plant pathology. About a year before I graduated, I actually got an opportunity to start working for the Scott's Company in Marysville and worked basically servicing Home Depots, Lowe's, and Kmart's. I was moonlighting nights and weekends doing that. About a month before I graduated, I actually took an internship working in research and development out in Marysville, and actually was part of the Roundup Ready creeping bent grass genetics team. So I worked with them on the basically genetic modification of different turf grasses. So that was really cool. About a year into that, I ended up unfortunately getting laid off. That around that time, that was right after 9/11, and we were in a pretty bad recession. Scott's, like a lot of companies, was making cuts. My wife was still finishing up her degree program at Ohio State, so I ended up waylaid in landscaping for a little while. Worked for a handful of different companies down in the Columbus area. Did about everything you can imagine: hardscape, landscape install, landscape maintenance services, including snow removal, fertilizing. Even worked for a company for a while doing tree sprays. A big tree care company down in the Columbus area. So I've done a lot. And then About a couple of years into that, I ended up getting an opportunity to work for Lesco. They hired me on as an assistant service center manager down in Columbus, and I was with them for about 4 years. I worked in three different locations for Lesco. The last one I actually managed, which was up here in Avon, Ohio. During that time, John Deere acquired us, and initially I was really optimistic, but as time went on, it didn't look like it was going to be such a great arrangement. So I started looking for other opportunities and ended up actually getting a job with a company based out of Fishers, Indiana. Called Advanced Turf Solutions. And they did not have a geographic presence up here in northern Ohio. So I opened the market for them. They were about a $35 million a year company when I came to work for them almost 14 years ago. And I think this last year we did just shy of $160 million, and we are expected to be at the $250 million mark somewhere within the next 5 years. So, been a great opportunity with them, a great opportunity opening the market for them up here. We've become a pretty dominant supplier up here in Northeast Ohio, and gives me a lot of flexibility to do things. I do a lot of consultation, diagnostic work for my clients, and also um, sell the products, materials to them that they use, help them write their programs. So it's a really, really great opportunity, and I'm really thankful for that. And it's also given me the opportunity to try something new that I haven't done before, which is teach. So hopefully, my goal with this is to really give you guys, knowledge and information that I've picked up over the last, 20 some odd years of being in this. And maybe my goal ultimately would be that you gain something that maybe you can use later on in your career endeavors from this class. I'd also like to maybe give you an appreciation for turf grass that maybe you haven't had in the past. I can tell you personally that grass has always been kind of a love-hate relationship for me. I never saw myself or imagined myself being as involved in it as I am, but over the years, I've really gained a significant understanding and appreciation of it and the value that it has for us in our landscapes today. So, a little bit about myself, and now I would like to go into our first module. And to set that up, I would like to start by saying that, before we get into the nitty gritty of all the technical stuff with turfgrass, I think it's always fascinating and interesting to understand a little bit of the why, some of the history, and the history of our interaction with it. And so when I thought about putting this class together, I thought it would be nice to take some time to kind of go through turfgrass, its history on Earth, how our destiny basically became intertwined with it, and kind of just a little overview of our journey, through our civilization, our development, and how turf's kind of been a part of that, and we've been involved with it through the process. So here we go. So, like I said, my goal right now is to get into basically the why of turfgrass, and how we got to where we are. Approximately 1/5 of Earth is covered in turfgrass, terrestrial Earth, that is. And that's pretty significant. That's a pretty good surface area of the Earth that's covered with grass, and we don't normally think about that, but I mean, just in the United States alone, if you look at that area running from Texas all the way up into Canada, basically from the Mississippi River over to the Rocky Mountains, that area is almost entirely turf grass. And there's other areas around Earth that are similar, whether it's a steppe region in the Eurasia, or the savanna regions all across Africa. So there's a significant amount of Earth that's covered by grasses, and turf grass specifically. There's more than 12,000 species, including ones that we don't normally think about: bamboo, corn, wheat, and then obviously our turf grasses. The earliest fossil records that we have are actually found in dinosaur poop. They've dated it back to approximately 55 to 70 million years ago. That's when they first started finding fossil records of grasses showing up. When we look at where this occurred, it would have been a landmass called Pangea at the time. This would have predominantly encompassed what we call today as Africa and South America. At that time, both of these land masses were joined. They're now separated by what we call the Atlantic Ocean today. But if you look at this area here in the middle regions of South America and Africa, that's basically where we see these grasses originating from. Shortly after this period, we entered into a period of global cooling, millions and millions of years of ice ages. And these ice ages, I believe, when you look at all the information that we have, I think that these ice ages played a significant role in the development of grasses as we see them today. It really gave them the opportunity, interestingly, to inhabit the earth in a big way. We are currently, we're the most recent period of ice age that we're probably still in is something called the Quaternary Ice Age. It began about 2.6 million years ago. Again, Quaternary would mean 4 glacial periods. Each one of these periods lasted approximately 100,000 years. And there were warmer interglacial periods in between that lasted about 10 to 12,000 years each. We are still believed to be in this. So there's definitely no question that man-made global warming is occurring when you look at the CO2 levels today versus historical record. It's very clear that we have increased the CO2 levels significantly. They're not the highest that they've ever been in the historic record of Earth, but they are definitely higher than they have been in recent time, at least over the last several 100,000 years. Um, so it's still really unclear with this what direction that we're going to go. If the global temperatures are going to continue to rise with the increase in CO2 levels, and we're going to come out of these glacial periods that we're in, or some other factors are going to play into this, and we're going to go back down. But nonetheless, we are believed to still be in one of these interglacial cycles in the Quaternary Ice Age. So during the glaciations, the Earth was covered overall significant amount of ice. Climatically, it was very different than it is today. It was much cooler and much drier. And when you think about this, almost arid or desert type, climate condition, grasses are actually much better adapted to these conditions. They can tolerate pretty wide swings in precipitation, temperature, and so you can kind of see when we're going into these drier periods how it's possible that grasses may have gotten a foothold on Earth. And through this period of time, I mean, you can see that from the earliest species of grass that were on Earth over the last, 50 million years or so, we've had a significant diversification and spread of species all over the Earth. And again, I believe that the ice ages played a role in this. They just were better adapted and evolved kind of to exist with the climatic conditions that were going on. We also saw, again, because of the change in climate, we saw gradual loss of forests all over the earth, and they were replaced with large open expanses filled with grasses. A lot of the mammals that existed on Earth at that time were very small, very primitive, warm-blooded, obviously. That gave them the ability to survive in the colder temperatures on Earth. But these creatures, these woodland creatures, ended up moving out into these grasslands. As that occurred, they they evolved into more grazing mammals instead of being forest dwelling. They became leaner, more muscular, taller, bigger. They grew longer and more muscular legs, adapted for running in the open grasslands. So obviously having to forage for food or cover large areas to gain the same nutritional value out of these grasses, but also to be able to run away from predators that had also evolved and adapted to live on these grasslands. And grasses and grazing animals seem to share a symbiotic relationship. These grasses are extremely tolerant of grazing, or what we would consider in landscape mowing. And the main meristematic growth parts are near the soil surface, out of harm's way. So these animals can come in here and chew this thing virtually down to the soil level, and the grass has the ability to regenerate itself. In fact, they actually seem to thrive under periods of intense grazing. So there's definitely a symbiotic relationship between grasses and grazing. Again, when you look at these grasslands, or pasture areas that we use for grazing today, I mean, they can literally be chewed down to the soil level. And if you take this pasture out of rotation, for a period of a few weeks, this will completely regrow and be recovered with grass and ready to be used again. The other interesting thing that happened, that I think is tied to the ice ages and the grasslands, is that just like all the other animals that moved out of the forests and into the grasslands, I think the predecessors of modern day man also made this same transition from the forests into the grasslands. When you look at the ancestral apes, they became more upright, bipedal, so they walked on 2 feet. They were taller with longer legs to better see above the grasses and to be able to run through them. And by being bipedal, also freed up our hands to do other things besides hanging on tree limbs. So, our thumb moved around to become an opposable thumb, so we could now grip things like tools. Our brains developed further. So, a lot of changes that occurred in human, that ultimately led to human beings today that are tied to this transition. These adaptations, along with color vision, allowed early humans to be able to better see and avoid predators and also stalk prey. So ultimately, this move into the grasslands, I really think, is what allowed human beings today to progress and become as advanced as they are, and basically, dominate Earth. And so this is a pretty significant advancement that happened again as a result of grasslands. Because of that, I believe that there's a deeply rooted, almost spiritual connection between the ancestral humans and grasslands. I believe that we owe our existence to them. I don't think that we would be what we are today if it wasn't for the adaptations that occurred as a result of these grasslands. And I believe that we still share this same deeply rooted connection to them today. If you look at many of our landscapes today, they incorporate the use of turfgrass areas or naturalized grass areas peppered by trees. And when you look at them, when you look at a lot of our parks and open areas all across the world, they are strikingly similar to the African savannas, where you have these huge areas of grass and they're peppered by trees or little wooded hammocks, here and there through these areas. So again, I think that it does play an important role in our landscape today. And like I said before, I really do believe that our existence as we know it today it wouldn't be this way if it wasn't for grasslands. So, we're going to fast forward a little bit, into what I would see as kind of the dawn of turf grass. This is kind of where grass moves from just being there and us living with it to us actually starting to control it, manipulate it, cultivate it. And this occurred basically around the 12th century is kind of where we start to see, the this change in the relationship or the dynamic that we have with turfgrass. So the earliest written accounts of turfgrass are in the 12th century. There's actually a Japanese text called the Sakateki that actually talks about the process of sodding or turfing, which was basically like we think of it today, where you're transplanting grass. In this case, they would have old pastures that the grass was maybe tired and worn out in, and they would transplant these pastures to other areas in the landscape, in their gardens. And around the same time that was going on over in the Far East, in Europe, during that period, this would be the medieval age in Europe. We had a lot of, basically, we had feudalistic societies at that time, a lot of little nation states, each with their own fortifications. So as they were building these fortifications to defend themselves, the trees were cleared in and around these castles and fortifications, and the grass was allowed to grow. In many cases, the grass was actually, again, planted in and around these areas and cultivated. It served a dual purpose around these fortifications. One was for obviously safety. If you think back to the ancestral humans on the savannah, They had the ability to look over wide expanses and see threats, and also see, food sources roaming out in these grasslands. Well, the same thing held true in medieval Europe. Again, if you clear out the trees, you have these wide open expanses now that you can see off into the distance. You can see threats if another neighboring clan or society was planning on attacking you. You had the ability to have early warning and prepare and defend yourself. They also use these grass areas around the fortifications for their livestock, for their cattle and other animals. The people typically would live inside of the fortification, and then all of the surrounding area would be utilized for agriculture. And obviously, one of the biggest things would have been for grazing and pasture. So they were maintained a couple of different ways. They were maintained through grazing, and they were also maintained through primitive mowing, which involved scythes. And they would actually get together groups of maybe 50 to 60 people or more, all in a line holding these scythes, and they would go through and they would sweep these across the grass and, in essence, mow it. Around the same time that this was going on, we started to see, society was advancing and people were living a little bit better. And so as society was evolving in the medieval era, we started to also see a rise in leisure activities. So the first turf sports actually ended up showing up probably about 100 or so years later. This would have been in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. Cricket was the first game to be played on grass, followed by lawn bowling. And the bowling greens gave rise to our modern fine bladed grasses. These finer bladed varieties were selected out of these pasture lands, and they were actually used and maintained for bowling greens, tennis courts, eventually golf putting greens. Soccer, as we know it, also saw its origins during the 12th century. Basically involved kicking a leather ball around on roadways and open meadows. It was much more violent and destructive than it is today. And it was often banned for extensive period of times throughout Europe, up through the early 1800s because of this. Football and rugby were also a couple of other sports. Again, much like soccer, they were banned through much of history in Europe. They did not really return to society until the 1800s, and up until about the 1860s, football and rugby were pretty synonymous with each other. Another sport that we always think of tied to turf grass is golf, and this also again gained its rise around the same time. There were a couple different forms of it being played throughout Europe at the time. Even though it's generally accepted to be Scottish in origin at the St Andrews links in Scotland. Um, there were some different variations that also developed across Northern Europe at the same time. So in Scotland, the goal was to hit a leather ball with a wooden stick to a distant target with the fewest strokes. A similar version of the game was developed and played by the Dutch, who named it Kolf, and they used clubs and holes. And there are references, actually, even in America, to early Dutch settlers coming to America and playing golf near Albany, New York, in 1650. So, these games, had their own identity, retained their own identity, even up through the early founding of the United States of America, or the American colonies at that time. Um, I think what happened, just when you kind of review the story and everything, is you have the Scots golf combined with they combined the Scottish and the Dutch games, which used clubs and bats and holes as a distant target. So you kind of have this marriage of your woods and your irons and the golf ball, and you have these fairways, and then you have the green, which would be the distant target with the actual hole. So you see this marriage of the two, and even if you look at the spelling, I mean, you have golf, which is the Scots version, and you have golf, which is the Dutch version. Put them together, what do you have? Golf. So I do believe that the actual modern day game of golf as we know it really came out of the marriage of these two. We see references back to St. Andrews banning the game in the 1400s. So it's been around for a while. Um, the modern game of golf as we know it today. Basically, like most other sports, they were refined and revamped. The rules, everything that we see today, actually came out of the 1800s. So that's when we saw the return of pretty much all of these sports back to society. At St. Andrews, there were originally 22 holes. Um, some of them were deemed to be too short, and during this time frame, they were combined to create a total of 18 holes. So if you think about that, that's where we get the modern 18-hole golf course from. Again, all of this came out of the 1800s, same time that we saw football, soccer, rugby, yeah, cricket, all of these games basically started becoming a prominent fixture of refined society in the 1800s. All of these sports had the same common underlying theme: turf, alcohol, and gambling. So again, that's where the initial initially where we see the advancement of turfgrass coming into our society, our culture, and the next piece that I'm going to get into, we're actually going to get a little bit further into its move into the landscape specifically. So as you see up to this point, the focus on turf and the management, cultivation of it was really primarily focused on it as a utilitarian thing. So either utilitarian in the sense it's used for pastures or safety and security, but also utilitarian in the sense that it was used for sports. Up to this point, grass really wasn't a large scale fixture of the landscape. It wasn't used for aesthetics. And so that's what I hope to cover in more detail in the next module. So, again, thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.